Hello, this is Jeffrey Milburn, and this is the Omni Art Salon number 234. It is the first part of a penetrating conversation I recently had with Alan Lurie, Managing Director of Grubb & Ellis, a national real estate service firm in New York City, and author of 5 Minutes on Mondays, Finding Unexpected Purpose, Peace, and Fulfillment at Work. Following a 25-year career as a licensed architect, Alan became a non-denominational ordained rabbi and has been teaching, leading prayer services, and writing on issues of faith and religion. This combination of meeting the demands of the business world while attending to the needs of spirit gives Alan both insight into and access to a very diverse world. In March, Alan's book 5 Minutes on Mondays was published and released, and our conversation today investigates his remarkable story of how he has become a modern-day office guru. If you can, just imagine the leaders of one of New York City's top real estate firms coming together every Monday morning to hear the moral and spiritual thoughts of a rabbi. Imagine them returning week after week, coming to eagerly anticipate those 5 minutes as a moment of uncommon peace in the world's most brutally competitive environment. Wouldn't you like to be a fly on the wall? To hear the paths Alan Lurie traced for his listeners, how he helped them bring together their spiritual and business lives, the sacred and the profane. Alan's book, 5 Minutes on Mondays, compiles these talks for the first time, sharing his deep and profound inspiration on the challenges everyone faces, at work and in life. Alan draws on millennia of philosophy, theology, and science to help us answer our deepest questions, comfort our deepest yearnings, and become better people, more connected to each other and to the greater purpose. I had a great time exploring with Alan his many insights and experiences, and I think you will find our conversation uplifting, humorous, and full of the spirit of inquiry and love as we travel Alan Lurie's road less traveled. And so now the Omni Art Salon proudly presents The Purpose, Peace, and Fulfillment of Alan Lurie, Part 1. Alan, I'd like to thank you so much for joining me today on the Omni Art Salon.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's good to be here.
Oh, good. And, you have such a fascinating story, and I kind of wanted to set up the conversation with my first question, which is, can you describe to us where you grew up and what it was like and how you became inspired to become a rabbi?
Well, I guess that's starting at the beginning, just like the Bible. Well, that's great. I appreciate that. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, in Brighton Beach, and my grandfather, of blessed memory, lived there. And when I was a baby, my family moved up to Rochester, New York. My dad worked at Kodak for many years as an executive there. And I grew up in a conservative Jewish household, which was very typical in the late 1950s, early 1960s in America. And my spiritual background at that time, Jeff, was, I would say, more formal in a way than it was spiritual, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. The Judaism of that time that was very popular in America, especially after the Holocaust, which was such a shock to the system, was one of tradition, was one of what you do, not as much one of what does it mean, or why do we do these things. And so for a young person who really is looking for meaning and looking for spiritual growth, it's not a very nourishing system. And I, like many people who grew up with that, came to a point where we rejected it. And we said, there's not a lot here for us to inform our lives that can really be transformational in terms of a growth vehicle. And I turned to Buddhism and Eastern traditions, meditation and what have you, and did that for many years, and really considered myself an atheist, because the image that had been presented to me of God was not one that was reconcilable with my experiences.
Mm-hmm. And this is during, what, the 1960s? The 70s?
This was into the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 50 years old now, so this was certainly through the 70s, and even into the 80s. I got married, I moved to Atlanta, and I found myself about 15 years ago in the middle of a transformational experience that changed my entire perspective and view of religion, of spirituality, of God, and of myself. And it was a powerful moment, and I can kind of return to that and detail that for you. And it was a moment of epiphany that came out of nowhere, a moment of grace, as I discuss in my book, that opened me to totally new possibilities of how things are and who I am. And again, I'll return to that if you'd like in some more detail.
We have lots of questions. You can. I'm sure we'll get into that, but go ahead with your timeline.
Yeah, and so after that, I became very involved in spirituality and in Judaism. I was working as an architect. I'm a licensed architect. I was running a business in Atlanta, and I spent most of my free time reading, learning, studying, being exposed to different spiritual traditions, and especially to Jewish traditions. My kids eventually went off to college, and I met a woman. I had gotten divorced before all this happened, and I met a woman who lives in New York who is a cantor, who I fell in love with immediately. Her cousin is a rabbi, and he and I were teaching together at a Sunday school, and he invited me to his house for Passover, and I walked in and heard her singing, and that was it for me.
That's wonderful.
And my life moved to a whole new quantum level when I moved to New York after my kids went to college and married her. Her name is Sharona, and she and I do a lot of spiritual teaching and leading services and marrying wonderful young couples. We do a lot of this together as I continue to work in real estate here in New York City.
When did you become a rabbi? Was that during that time frame?
I just became a rabbi about 3 years ago.
Oh, so this is fairly recent.
It is fairly recent. I had done most of the studying before that, and after my kids again went away and I had some time, I studied more in depth. I found a rabbi here in New York who I could study with. I got private, non-denominational ordination through him in a very traditional kind of fashion, and that was relatively recently.
Did you ever study the Kabbalah? The Kabbalah? I always say it two ways. I'm not sure which is right.
Well, it's in modern Hebrew it's Kabbalah, and Kabbalah literally means reception. L'kabel means to receive. And I've studied it, and I teach introductory Kabbalah to people. It's an incredibly deep, incredibly complex, incredibly rich source of all kinds of information, and there's really not a unified system. It's many different systems and many different books that go into it. But certainly the mystical side of Judaism is what calls to my heart and where I spend most of my energy.